Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Okay, we're just going to continue on the thread of the Arc de Triomphe, okay, and its arrival in New York. Anyway, I just wanted to mention the Shard whilst we're at it, and how I've previously mentioned that Qatari money was used uh, um, to finance that project. The developer of Shard says London owes a debt to Qatar after London's new skyscraper was officially inaugurated. Okay, and there was a lot of money that was invested by Qatar into it. Well, there you go. Estimated to be worth 1.5 billion pounds. That's a lot of money spent on this, right? The tallest building in Western Europe. And again, it's symbolic. The shard itself is symbolic of the phallic symbol. So study that. Score a line underneath it if it interests you. It's the shard, as in the phallic symbol. Again, with other symbols, represents divinity and the sun from the two opposites, from the sun and the moon. You'll see it represented by the Egyptian obelisk. That's basically its origin. Then you'll see it in different forms, like the shard, or you've got the Burj Tower in Dubai, or you've got the Big Ben in London, or you've got a lot of. I mean, this is from the what I've studied in terms of architecture. If you look at the tower in Saudi, that basically which has never settled with me well. I've always felt a very dank energy in the bottom of my stomach every time I see that tower, because of what I've understood about architecture. And I understand that the firm they actually basically gave the architectural work to, Saudi did, were affiliate to masonry, right? So again, I mean, to me, it stands to reason why they wouldn't put their sort of symbolism. You'll see it in the uniform of the Saudi police as well, and you'll see it everywhere. If you go to Saudi, you'll see the one eye kind of symbolism as well. So you see like Dajjal's influence, from even when it comes to like household brands, whether that be McDonald's with the golden arch and all this other Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect the ummah sort of stuff that basically is available in the precinct of the haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. And then there's something just not right about anything overtowering the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Kaaba, or anything casting a shadow over it. It's just not, anyone, mashallah, any Muslim, it wouldn't settle well with them. It just doesn't feel right in the gut. And then you've got, like we've mentioned, how the moon, again, even with Pakistan and their flag, when you study flags, you find out the sort of powers who basically slipped it in to their symbolism, slipped in their symbolism without us even realizing. The moon or the star or the sun has nothing to do with Islam, never has done historically. In fact, we don't use symbols, subhanallah. The only thing that ever has been used is the seal of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Muhammad Rasulullah, and apart from that, there is no symbolism in Islam. Yet we find ourselves using the moon and the star, and how I've mentioned in masonry, it basically represents the male and the female, right? The two opposites, and you find always the star within the crest, and the crest for them, because it's female, it's the male entering the female. Okay, so the phallic symbol entering, which again is the sun, and the sun is a star, and then you've got the moon, which again is symbolized in the goddess form as Isis, right? And then you've got the whole. That's a different story altogether. We won't discuss Isis and how occultic that particular movement is, and where it stems from. Anyway, so I wanted to mention this shard again. If you look at it, a lot of Qatari money's gone into it. The money of the Ummah is basically been used against us. It started even when it comes to, what they did was, look, if you go back and study history, subhanallah, you'll find that the Khilafah was dismantled by using riba. Okay, for Turkey, sadly, the colonial powers over here, Britain, had basically given out a loan to Turkey, the Khilafah, on interest. And Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has declared, in fact, the final surah, as I understand it, ayats to be revealed of the Quran wasn't اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورديت لكم الإسلام دينا, but rather it was the ayats of riba, okay, and the warning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala waging war along with his beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam against those who engage in riba. Now, just imagine when the Khilafah, that's the final nail in the coffin, because we've been following the shadows of the West, in everything. Even today we do it, we mimic them. Okay, we pride ourselves in copying them in every aspect, in every sphere of life, right? In fact, we measure our self-worth through that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. Rather, we should be measuring our self-worth in how much of the sunnah is in our lives, how much of that is reflected in us, not just outwardly, but internally, and both manifest one another. The outward manifests the internal, and the internal manifests the outward. And sadly, we're so far removed from that reality. We've not realigned ourselves to Sunnah, and we're chasing these guys, and their shadow, literally, like the Prophet ﷺ said, we'll follow them into the lizard hole. We're doing no different. We're seeing it all world over. And these guys obviously they went to Saudi, using the petrodollar and anchoring the barrel, the oil, pegging it against the dollar. And when they did that, what happened is they gave almost immediately after removing the gold standard from the dollar, they basically gave the dollar intrinsic value. And then the world had to basically purchase a commodity to run the engines of the industrial manufacturing as well as other progress by investing and buying the dollar. So the dollar all of a sudden got intrinsic value and power by virtue of the money of the Ummah, the Muslim Ummah. This was Baitul Mal, it belongs to, the Muslims of the world. And we got lulled into this simply because of our ignorance, to be honest with you, in terms of economics and what was really happening behind the scenes and the wool they were pulling over our eyes. With that, they built the infrastructure of America, okay, and their infantries, their technologies, and basically it was almost like England had passed on the baton, right, to the States, and the States was almost like this petri dish where they were experimenting, and they set up the Masonic influences there, right, and put them in places of power so that they could coerce and lead. And the hope, from the outset, as I understand it, America was set up to influence and coerce the world into a certain direction, manipulate it, divide divide certain regions, okay, and then implement their systems. Again, the whole Hegelian dialectic, and using them as a stepping stone to do that, right? And then the idea is to make it collapse simply because they want the reign of power to be basically pushed towards Israel. Okay, in anticipation for the return of Dajjal Lanatullahi alayhi. So I mean, you see all these powers working behind the scenes. How the money of the Ummah is utilized against us, and you see why I'm basically connecting this topic to the Ark of the Triumph in a second. If you go to Again, remember the numbers and stuff like that. This is their official site for the shard. You can just see the A, it's not very nice at all. I mentioned that it's on the 32nd Street. Remember when we said numbers in numerology, after 32 it's 33, and we found that, again, a symbolic number in terms of, this is probably one of the reasons why I think Prince Harry might put himself forward, because in terms of numerology is 32, and then it's very likely that basically as he achieves that symbolic number in age, they'll basically make a leader of him in terms of the military arm of the one world government. Right. Again, there's something very, very fishy about that. You'll see that number echo throughout the recent incident that happened. We talked about how they closed the 32nd Street, just stopped short of that, and then you've got the symbolically the Arc de Triomphe, which represents the same thing, the same degrees, but the keystone missing, so it stops at the 32nd, right? And now it's arrived on the 19th of September, and just the day before, which is the 18th, which is multiplied into 3 6s, right? The number of the beast. So again, that's basically vibrating on a lower level and not having achieved the alchemy of man, which the perfect number for them is 7, which is interesting because it connects to the 7 heavens and then the Arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see, I mean, this is basically the sort of this is the sort of numerology and the sort of language that they basically play with out there. Now, moving on to the Arc de Triomphe, which I wanted to basically focus your attention on. I just wanted you to be aware of how we're being lulled into this. Now, it really, really disappoints me. I mean, I've known about it since I took an interest in the Arc de Triomphe when it was revealed in Trafalgar Square, and then I saw those very dark entities, the shadows. One had stopped near a pillar and one had went through. Now, what's been said in the grapevine, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, is that was actually Iblis Landulali, and almost accepting this invitation, as it were, to take over the reins, of what's to come in this third phase that they've got. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. There's not much substance in that claim, but potentially there's something there to dwell on, to ponder on. Anyway, I want you guys to take a look at this, and see what you make of it.
This article here by Emirates 24/7. Historic Ark Gate of Palmyra's Temple of Baal in New York City. Ark Gate is a result of a strategic partnership held between the UAE, UNESCO, and the Institute for Digital Archaeology. Let me read this article briefly for you. Quote, under the auspices of the UAE and in collaboration with UNESCO, the University of Oxford and Harvard University, a restored three-dimensional version of
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave us. You've got the UAE, and yet basically they're supported and finances, I understand it, the restoration and the reconstruction of the Arc de Triomphe. And not only that, they're part of this whole, they're financing its tour around the world. Apparently it's meant to be touring 100 countries, and it's in New York at the moment, and this is the Ummah's money, and the Arc de Triomphe actually is symbolic of a rebellion against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, seriously, are they this gullible? I don't think so. I mean, I used to live out there, and I was alhamdulillah, blessed enough to work with and rub shoulders with some people, very, very, very influential individuals in the UAE who were part of the royal elite of that country, and they were in very close proximity to them. And I know that they basically aren't entirely ignorant, so that really concerns me. It gives me almost like this, I feel this it's just really upsetting, and it represents, this was a gateway that was dedicated to the a false deity called Baal, right, which is basically Baphomet. And Baphomet, if you look into it, represents the Shaitan Lanutulali, okay, in Freemasonry. with the light torch above its head, the goat face, and a male-female body. Which again, the symbolism is about the goat represents rebellion, the torch represents illumination on top of the head, right? And then the female and the male body represents the convergence of the two opposites. So Allah subhanahu wa protect us. This is, the money of the ummah, and it's just, it's really disheartening. And then, this is what we're coming to now.
Palmyra's monumental Arc of Triumph destroyed.
One of the places, and Allah subhanahu to protect the ummah. I don't wish it on anything or anyone. I lived out there, and the energy in Dubai was not nice at all. I didn't like it. I never ever wish to return back there again. Sadly, a lot of us go out there on holiday, and it's like you'll see it. Everyone's quite they basically almost like want to sing a song about their visits, and shout out loud and proud that they went there and this is where they're at and these are the locations, and they kind of share those kind of tweets or whatever it is, and that's wanted to protect us, when in fact, whilst I was living out there, seriously, the place doesn't have a soul. There's something very wrong with it. It doesn't feel right. I had to move away from there with my family to Abu Dhabi after having spent 2.5 years in Dubai. And it was anyway, so I moved to Abu Dhabi. At least that place was a bit more family friendly, alhamdulillah. But I learned a lot and I experienced a lot out there. And I feel like, when the three great landslides that the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned, the one in the west, the one in the east, the one in the Arabian Peninsula, I personally feel that the UAE is going to be, when the one in Arabian Peninsula is mentioned, I think the UAE is going to basically fall within the encatchment of that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But they can't continue at the rate that they are. It's totally basically just everything happening out there. A lot of stuff is not in line with Quran and Sunnah. It actually opposes most of it, which is very, very like if there was a blueprint, it's all about egoism, it's all about self-centeredness, it's all about materialism, it's all about acquiring stuff. So I mean, they're all basically aspects that are totally they entirely contradict Islam and its teachings.
At the hands of the terrorist organization Daesh was revealed on Tuesday. Now, interestingly here, Daesh is another name for ISIS, but let me continue. In the presence of Mohammed bin Abdullah al-Gurgawi, Minister of Cabinet Affairs, Vice Chairman of the Board of Trustees, and Managing Director of Dubai Future Foundation, as well as a number of specialists and subject matter experts, interested parties, and tourists, the historic Arc Gate of Palmyra's Temple of Baal was reconstructed in New York City's Times Square, facing the municipal building. And one more paragraph, the reproduction of the Temple of Baal's Arc Gate came as a result of the strategic partnership held between the UAE, UNESCO, and the Institute of Digital Archaeology, the essence of a global joint venture formed between the esteemed University of Oxford and Harvard University, aiming at documenting and rebuilding details of the region's most prominent archaeological sites using 3D imaging and printing techniques with a keen view to...
Okay, guys, I just noticed something. Did you see that? Okay, subhanallah, that's no mistake. 32 and 19. 32 is the number before that, and 19 is the number just before 18, right? So, subhanallah. The 3 6s and the 32.
Imaging and printing techniques with a keen view to protect and preserve their legacy and cultural heritage in the event of exposure to existing threatening conditions. End quote. So, as some have already noted, it is strange that these bombings and attacks happened right as this archway was put up and then revealed on Tuesday. And that is very strange if you think about it.
Now, this is something that we'd already discussed, and in the other threads concerning the Arc of Triumph, how it was very curious that this bombing almost happened as almost like a ritual. sacrifice in anticipation of this arch arriving, and then what this arch potentially signifies, as far as I'm concerned. Without the keystone, it's incomplete, and it just like symbolically they made the two twin towers collapse, and it was a false flag. It symbolically represented the two towers of Jachin and Boaz. Look that up, Jachin and Boaz. That's Jachin, and Boaz is Boaz. They're basically the two pillars in masonry, as well as the one that the Jewish believe in for the Temple of Solomon. The keystone again, it's interesting that it doesn't have one, which basically means incompletion, and I think they're about to collapse the country, and this is what this potentially signifies, and it's going to be the beginning of phase 3 of what they intend to roll out upon the Ummah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us, protect us, and instill at least help us to regain our firasa. It's been taken away from us by virtue of conditions, circumstances, and the choices the Ummah has been making. That's a blessing, and it's a blessing that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we retain parts of it, or we basically lose it, depending on the sort of choices we've made in life, or we continue making. So I mean, certainly collective tawbah is necessary. We need to basically reflect and look at our lives and look at how we're basically being played, how the ummah is being coerced, and led, and we've got these, unworthy leaders who are, as the Prophet ﷺ said, they would be clear liars, and they are. They tell us one thing, and we see exactly the other happening, unfolding upon the ummah. So we get lulled into this over and over again because of this hope, this false sense of hope that we basically hold on to. Yet we're basically pinning our hopes on non-Muslims. Subhanallah. How can we turn to non-Muslims for assistance and guidance? We should be turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That should be our first point of protocol, is that we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we fall in sujood, and we ask from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the means, provided in our sincerity, and the change. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to change our state and condition until we change what's within ourselves. The assistance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't come, and it's got to be collective. It's not the individual. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's assistance is with the collective, and we have to together set aside our differences. Really, we have to let go of them, find what's common between us. Once we've got that common ground, then subhanallah, our hearts will open up. Just like a flower does when the sun is out. It opens up and it takes the sun's rays in, right? Then photosynthesis occurs. Then that flower basically blooms to a tree again, and then before you know, you've got fruits. And its roots are firmly held into the ground, right? And then it benefits. It benefits creation. And we need to basically open up our, subhanallah, our hearts. I mean, this whole thing about, this school of thought, that school of thought. Look, if we can't say very clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, that they have exited, right, the fold of Islam, if we can't say that, then we should basically humble ourselves in front of these individuals, because they are, just like you and I, the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just like we expect the pardon and the forgiveness and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should also have that husn adhan, not only that husn adhan of our fellow brothers in Islam, but also that expectation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala equally will forgive this individual if there are any shortcomings in them. In fact, all shortcomings are, within myself. The two eyes, and like our elders say, we have two eyes, and one eye is to focus on our own shortcomings, and the other eye is to look at the good in everyone else. If we tarry through life like this, and subhanallah, we won't have time to look at anyone else's shortcomings. We'll just basically reflect on our own, and there's always room for development. Even whilst we're developing, when you come to the zenith of that, and you come to the actual, and you'll see that with our elders, look at their lives. they realize that when they get to a certain point, subhanallah, all they see is their own shortcomings. All they see when they look in the mirror is that they amount to that they're insignificant, right? And that everything is subject to the discretion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a life of piety, a life of deeds, and a life of everything, according to Quran and Sunnah, yet it doesn't lull them into this false sense of reality that they have achieved. They actually feel like, subhanallah, I could come to the absolute very last second of my life, and if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. And this scares them, this really worries them, this really concerns them. It's a very real concern, right? They feel at the bottom of their, hearts, the depths of their hearts, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can rob them of that, and this is why they just humble themselves, and that's what humility is about, subhanallah, yeah? We were not going to, none of us are going to enter paradise if we have an iota of pride in us. So how can we look at the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with disdain, especially when, subhanallah, they have got the most valuable asset ever to be bestowed on mankind, or to be bestowed, which is the article of faith, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They've got that in their heart. That individual has become infinitely priceless. He's the reason, or she's the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has continued to run the nizam of everything that we know that exists around us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will continue to run it, subhanallah. So the universe will continue functioning the way it functions. Our world will continue, and the dunya will continue to function the way it functions, once there is one individual who still remains and praying the kalima La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there.
If they're revealing the Ark on Tuesday, the 20th of September, then surely the construction of it began a few days before. And of course, over the weekend, the bombings and the stabbings and everything else that happened, is there a connection? And I think from a spiritual perspective, absolutely there's a connection. When you construct something like this, you're allowing openings to occur in the spiritual dimension. Of course, it's going to start spilling.
You see that 12 hours, 2 6s, and then over here 18 September, 3 6s, yeah, and then there's a reference to 6 at the end of the date as well.
Into the physical dimension. Now, the big part of this is this obvious connection to UNESCO, the UAE, which is basically the outskirts of the United Nations. The UN just keeps popping up everywhere, and their spiritual perspective, okay, for anyone who's even skeptical of this, their spiritual reality, their religious mindset and worldview is tied to the occult and the mystery religions, and this is obvious proof right here by reconstructing this archway. And if you read through the article here, you'll notice that the people that put it up use fighting words. They use a perspective that says that they are going to continue to preserve archaeology. It belongs to the human race, and anyone who destroys it is wrong, i.e. the terrorist groups like Daesh or ISIS. And grouped together with that category of terrorists is now Christians, because I know a lot of Christians who have spoken out against the construction of something like this archway, because obviously we see the spiritual significance. Now the thing is, here in America, we have the freedom of religion. If somebody wants to construct this temple to Baal, they fully have the right to do so. And that's what it means to live in this country and having the freedom of speech and expression. So if they want to, go ahead and do it. But our warning is a spiritual one. Our warning to you is, hey, there's something else going on here, and it goes deeper than simply the construction of the temple itself. Going back to the article, it states here, quote, "The creation of this model of the historic Ark of Triumph falls under the strategic partnership of the Dubai Future Foundation, UNESCO, the Institute of Digital Archaeology, and the joint venture between the University of Oxford and Harvard," already read that, "as part of a global project aimed at documenting the details of archaeological sites in the region using 3D imaging technology and then completely rebuilding them with 3D printing to protect and preserve them from disappearing if they are at risk, in that they are a legacy of human civilization. Like I said, strong language. And I continue, quote, in addition to the unveiling of the Ark, a gallery was inaugurated exhibiting 3D images which have been received through the Million Image platform, the global initiative that falls under the same project. This initiative aims to encourage public and media institutions operating in countries where archaeological sites are at risk for destruction to photograph the sites using 3D imaging technology and send them to the platform to be printed and rebuilt. The initiative was launched last April in London and has attracted 300,000 images so far of the different regions and archaeological sites. So it's really weird because the way they portray it, the preservation is not so much the object itself, but it's the construction of it.
This particular temple is very similar to the designs of the Temple of Solomon that the Jews intend to build and Allah want to protect our third Haramain on the Temple of Mount. It's very similar to it if you look at the architecture of it.
The way it looks, and you can rebuild it using 3D printing, so you don't need the real thing anymore. It's a very strange mindset here, and I think this goes hand in hand with some of the news coming out about quantum teleportation breakthroughs where DNA and data is encrypted and teleported, basically, because what we're going to start seeing is an actual physical reality of bilocation, being at two places at the same time, creating two places that appear the same in two different locations. This kind of construction and building of the image, I think, is underway here, and this is obvious proof for it. The tie-in to this bigger global beast system is ridiculous. If you think about Obama's latest speech, I mean, this is a year after the Pope gave his speech to the UN to this idea of sustainable development, this new thing that we're going to have global peace by the year 2030, where everybody is bio-identified and we're all part of this one happy family global system under the rule of the UN and their military and everything else. You have Obama 1 year later in September talking about how everything needs to be handed over to a global political platform. And at the same time, as this thing goes global even more, the United States, I think, finally, people are starting to wake up. You know, more people still need to wake up, but a lot of people have woken up with this election cycle. It seems like people are pumping the brakes hard here, and I see a lot of pro-Trump people, and I lean more Trump than I do Hillary, obviously, but at the same time, I'm still skeptical of politics in general, although I do tend to agree with more of the things that either Donald Trump has said or the comment.
See how they've got the male and the female, and again, the cardinal directional colors. That's something maybe anyone who's inclined to study it. Colors, again, just like numbers and numerology and sacred geometry and architecture and symbolism, colors also are part of the same language of the occult and mystery religions. And the red and the blue represents the opposites. That's why you'll see it in the flag of France, the UK, where you've got the Union Jack, which is the flag of Jacob. I mean, all of this goes back to historical religious doctrines, you know. And then you've got the red, blue, and white of the American flag as well, and you'll see where the alliances are. It's certainly a topic worthwhile studying. Flags and all the flags all over the world, they're very, very symbolic, and so are the shields representing certain institutions.
That surrounds the things he has said. So, you know, this isn't a complete endorsement or anything like that, but if it has to do with the lesser of two evils, then it's pretty clear that I'll go with Trump over Hillary any single day. But aside from all the personal politics, the bigger picture here is that the UN is really doing a hard takeover here. And we need to prepare for this spiritually and in many ways physically. I'm not going to sit here and be an alarmist. I'm not going to try to sell you, you know, a bug out bag or anything like that. But there is something to be said about being smart about these things, being prepared, you know, thinking through, hey, if something happens, what am I going to do? And having a plan, because once this whole UN global infrastructure is set up and ready to go, that's when I think even bigger, quote-unquote, terror attacks or some sort of much bigger scale event is going to happen. Or at least that's what I think they are planning. I think they want even more chaos than this. This is pretty chaotic. I think they want more.
Remember the phrase that they coined, "order out of chaos." Yeah, that's you're seeing that all over the world, and then they just implement what they're seeking to basically bring into fruition in the dust once the dust settles.
More, but I think they want the global infrastructure to be even more solidified before the.
We need to be concerned about what they're doing in Syria and how there's this exodus of the people as well, and how then the United Nations and Europe are being encouraged to basically take these refugees in and settle them down. You've got to understand what motivates them and what the agenda is. And to be honest with you, it's part of the Greater Israel Project, where what they're trying to do is basically the neighboring countries, which Syria is part of. If you look at the map of the Greater Israeli Project, they're looking to conquer a huge section of Sham and occupy it. And you can't occupy any kind of land. Well, it'd be very difficult for you whilst there are individuals there, and you'll find interesting enough the demographic that they're ousting from these countries that are looking for refuge. You'll find they're not necessarily old ages, or rather a much younger demographic. And these are the individuals, because I mean, if you basically expel that generation, then what you've almost done is basically expel the people of that country. Okay, so it's ready and easier to kind of basically expand into those territories with their future plan. So I mean, again, we're being lulled into this whole thing, and subhanallah, yes, certainly we have to support Muslim brethren, but it doesn't seem like the Ummah realizes what's being done here, and why it's being done, and why there's this exodus, why Egypt's infrastructure has been compromised severely throughout the stages when you saw this kind of coup and this civilian uproar and what was happening there, and how the governments got replaced, and all of this, it was part of like even though Hosni Mubarak would claim that he was part of the structure, yet the whole kind of dissemination of the government and then the infrastructure and control and putting other powers at play there, is part of the same. Because don't forget, Egypt has probably the highest population, Arabic population, in that region, right? And one of the major threats to Israel, if that population were to turn against them. What they've done is basically catapulted that populace into austerity and poverty, and basically dismantled its military capability. They've done that to Syria as well, right? And they have ousted their people. They're basically, Jordan, as far as I'm concerned, are basically champagne buddies. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, right? But this is the impression I got from stuff that I've researched and seen. And again, it seems like this whole, and any other threat that within the region, that could possibly amount to some sort of a threat to this project to move the power seat to Israel is being dismantled. Subhanallah, you're seeing it, we're seeing it. Look at the places and the territories they're fighting against, and the countries, Libya, Iraq. Subhanallah, any powers that amounted to anything, subhanallah, they've dismantled them. The infrastructure, you take a look at those countries, what they were like, even under the oppressive rule of their leaders, they were still prosperous and were progressing. But if you look at them right now, subhanallah, there's just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. Like I said, it's we desperately need to realign ourselves to Quran and Sunnah.
Try to pull off another big time false flag event. This sort of thing is going to be interesting because, again,
so the displacement of these youths is deliberate. They want to push them out from that region, right, into Europe and everywhere else. And they want in the scheme of things and in the plan, as I understand it, they're intending for Europe to collapse anyway, along with America, and then start a new kind of thing. So I mean, whilst they're out of mind, out of sight, and in a place that's going to collapse as far as they're concerned anyway, it kind of almost contributes towards that particular agenda anyway, by creating another source of pressure on an already ailing economy, which we're seeing, happening. I mean, as soon as the Deutsche Bank collapses, we'll basically see our run of our economical collapse, and that most likely will happen as soon as the American dollar collapses. We're expecting that to happen very soon, and maybe potentially they'll use a false flag event within the states, or one of the three events that I mentioned to you, whether it be some sort of a virus and its containment, which will require for them to enact martial law, or whether it be you've seen the tensions right now being like almost coerced through the mainstream media between the Trump followers and Hillary Clinton's followers, right? And they've created a divide right through the center of the demographic of that country. So I mean, you can potentially see them turning up against each other and coerced in that direction, and then martial law. Or you can see potentially we're talking about this asteroid which is heading in that particular direction, and that being used to basically enact martial law. But once that happens, what will follow next as part of that micro plan is the collapse of the dollar, and from the collapse of the dollar, it will basically then lend into the Malhama, the World War III, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but this is potentially how we see things unfolding.
The military is also changing big time. Artificial intelligence, huge part of the military. I think it's going to continue to infiltrate more and more. A global police force is already in play here, and I think we may even start seeing positive propaganda for a global military. This idea of protecting the earth, and it sounds science fiction, but I think this is what they're trying to produce. Because ultimately, from an eschatological point of view, in terms of Bible prophecy, we know that the armies of the earth are going to turn towards the return of Jesus Christ and try to fight and kill the returning Lord of all. To humans, the return of the Lord, the wrath of God, the day of the Lord, which is talked about all over the place in Scripture, is a bad moment. It's an attack from their enemy, which is our Savior. And so I think God is trying to allow time for people to wake up and to see this. And hopefully, when you start looking at the confluence of events with the Pope's speech to the UN last year, a year later, Obama's...
There's certainly a confluence. You'll see that right now. I mean, that concerns me, subhanAllah. Because I mean, like I said, you see the revival of the Christian masses. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah, but still not sufficient. There's a revival in Islam. And then there's this basically whole climate change we're experiencing. There's this agenda for this kind of these opposing forces, and these lines being drawn out between the West, and then you've got Russia, China, Iran, and the lesser countries that are basically siding with them. You're seeing basically this extreme weather taking place, all these flash floods, earthquakes, these anomalies in the heavens, subhanallah, and all of which is literally, if you really, really study them, you'll find that they've gained superb momentum, since 2016. It's almost like there's this push, right? There's this very real dark force that's basically in almost like a rush to push this. And I understand that the plan that they've got together is basically it's been basically vetted around the arrival of this star system, right? And that's something that they basically can't influence. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's they can't basically influence its passage, its timing, its arrival, what it will do, how it will impact us. those things they can only guesstimate to a certain extent, and I think that Shaitan Lanatullah has planned, along with his minions, basically this whole thing, from the economic collapse to World War III to the extraterrestrial contact and that card as well, to do away with most religious beliefs, at least demographics, and lull them into a false spiritual kind of faith. And this whole coming together of the nations and one religion, one world, one government, one military arm, and this whole stage that's been set, and then for the fault, I mean, the Christians are expecting, Isa alayhi salam to return, and we know clearly that Isa alayhi salam will return, but he's going to be preceded by Dajjal, so a lot of the Christian faithful will be basically lulled into this false Antichrist, who's going to pose as, Isa alayhi salam. And it seems like this whole thing's been set up around it. And that's why this push from the mainstream media as well, and NASA and other astronomical societies, with this whole extraterrestrial kind of life existing out there. And we're going to see that agenda gaining momentum soon, very soon. If let's see whether my observations and understanding of the world is accurate in this regard. I understand that they will very soon basically claim that they've found extraterrestrial life, any sort of life form, but they will claim that they have in any part of our solar system, and it's going to happen very soon. Just again to kind of basically warm up the psyche to the idea of extraterrestrial life, if it exists in any sort of form in any one of the planetary bodies or celestial bodies within our solar system, then there's no reason to believe that intelligent extraterrestrial life doesn't exist elsewhere. And during the passage of this particular system and its planetary bodies is when I think they'll use this sort of holographic military technology along with dark forces, the sort of dimensions that we discussed with the upload that I uploaded yesterday about CERN, and how they're trying to tear the fabric of these dimensions, which is obviously the alam of the jinn, and basically open up, tear that parda that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. Potentially, it seems like they're basically, if you look to CERN, the symbolism and then even like the rituals that they have done, one too many. It's maybe I'll do a video on that and show you exactly the sort of kind of marketing material that they put forward, and how all of it is basically replete with occultic symbolism and references. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But just let this chap continue and finish off there.
Speech to the UN this year. All the handover talk about the internet going to the UN. Watching the 2030 Sustainable Development Infrastructure being built through the use of technology, the dissemination of technology, and the lack of oversight that we're seeing there in the political realms, with the sort of advancements in experiments in all sorts of areas, from biology to biotech to DNA and genetic editing. And this whole big thing is the beast. And it is clearly here. The spirit of Antichrist permeates this world now. And if you don't see that yet, you better wake up and open your...
Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and the Ummah. Sorry about leaving it on that image. I didn't really see it coming. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and protect the Ummah. Subhanallah. But you see there's this awakening happening in the Christian masses as well. As Muslims, subhanallah, each and every one of us, including myself, we need to basically wake up to this as well. There's a very, very big threat on the horizon. And we've been very clearly told, and there's absolutely no two ways about it. It's and that is that the fitan of Dajjal Lanatullah is going to be the greatest fitan ever visited to mankind. Sadly, this topic is very little talked about, but again, this is hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, so it will come into fruition that the Dajjal will not be spoken about at the mimbars of the masjid, and this will be one of the signs of his arrival. Lanatullahi alayhi, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Jazakallahu khairan wa ahsan jaza for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.